For years, the Pittsburgh Steelers were the gold standard of NFL consistency. They weren't flashy, and they didn't panic. They built patiently through the draft, relied on player development, and resisted the urge to chase headlines. From Ben Roethlisberger to TJ Watt, from Antonio Brown to Minkah Fitzpatrick, their stars were usually homegrown. But in 2025, everything changed. The Steelers have traded their patience for urgency. Aaron Rodgers is their new quarterback. Jalen Ramsey is anchoring the secondary. George Pickens, gone. DK Metcalf now wears black and gold. Darius Slay signed. TJ Watt wants a historic contract extension, and it's unclear if Pittsburgh can even afford to keep him. A team that once preached discipline is now spending big and moving fast. What triggered this transformation? Was it a brilliant strategic shift, or a desperate attempt to chase a Super Bowl window that might already be closing? The old Steelers way to understand the shockwaves of the 2025 offseason, you have to understand the Steelers' DNA. Under Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin, Pittsburgh took pride in resisting trends. They weren't the team that overpaid in March. They weren't the team trading first-round picks for 30-year-olds. They believed in the draft. They developed talent from within. Their roster stability was unparalleled. Roethlisberger had an 18-year run at quarterback. Mike Tomlin is the second longest tenured head coach in the NFL. The Steelers always valued continuity, not chaos. And their results backed it up. Playoff appearances were routine, double-digit wins were expected, and they almost never bottomed out. But as the AFC evolved, with teams like the Chiefs, Ravens, Bengals, and Texans stockpiling firepower, the Steelers were starting to feel left behind. Quarterback exodus and a vacuum at the top. The first domino fell at quarterback. Russell Wilson left Pittsburgh in free agency after a forgettable 2024 campaign. Meanwhile, the Justin Fields experiment collapsed just as quickly. Fields also walked in free agency, and the Steelers entered the offseason without a clear QB1 for the first time in years. That vacuum forced the front office to think differently. The answer wasn't waiting in the draft. It wasn't on the practice squad. It wasn't even in their system. If Pittsburgh was going to contend in 2025, they'd need a proven winner. That's when the Aaron Rodgers conversations began. Darius Slay signs with the Steelers. Before Rodgers even entered the equation, Pittsburgh made its first unexpected splash. On March 13th, the Steelers signed veteran cornerback Darius Slay to a one-year, $10 million fully guaranteed deal. Slay, now 34, had been released by the Eagles and was viewed by some as a depth piece. But the Steelers saw him differently. A veteran leader with playoff experience who could help stabilize a shaky secondary. It was their first sign of a philosophical shift. The old Steelers wouldn't have signed a declining veteran to a premium short-term deal. This new front office didn't hesitate. George Pickens traded to the Cowboys. Just days later, the Steelers stunned the NFL by trading George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys for a package of draft picks. Pickens, a fan favorite with jaw-dropping talent, had also developed a reputation for being high maintenance. There were clashes with coaches, questions about effort, and moments of immaturity. Still, his upside was undeniable. Trading him meant the Steelers weren't just reshuffling. They were changing course entirely. They wanted reliability, they wanted discipline, and they wanted veterans. DK Metcalf acquired from Seattle. To replace Pickens, Pittsburgh immediately struck a deal with Seattle for DK Metcalf, a more established, more physical, and arguably more consistent receiver. Metcalf was acquired in exchange for draft capital, then signed to a 5-year, $150 million extension. He gave the Steelers a true number, one target with size, speed, and postseason experience. This wasn't a long-term developmental piece. This was a win-now weapon for a team preparing to make a run. The Aaron Rodgers gamble. With Pickens gone and Metcalf in, the Steelers turned to the most pivotal decision of their offseason. In late March, they signed Aaron Rodgers to a one-year deal worth $13.65 million. with incentives pushing it to $19.5 million. Rodgers, now 41, was coming off a torn Achilles and a messy departure from the Jets. But the Steelers weren't looking for long-term security. They were looking for immediate leadership. With no quarterback solution on the roster, and with the draft lacking an elite option at their pick slot, Rodgers was the best option available. It was a calculated risk, but the kind Pittsburgh never used to take. The Rodgers signing marked a full departure from the Steelers' way. It was short-term, it was aggressive, and it was entirely out of character. Jalen Ramsey acquired from Dolphins. Just when it looked like the off-season frenzy had slowed, the Steelers dropped their biggest bombshell. On June 30th, they traded Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Miami Dolphins in exchange for Jalen Ramsey, tight end Jonnu Smith, and a draft pick. Fitzpatrick, still in his prime, was a foundational piece of Pittsburgh's defense. Ramsey, though elite, is 30 and nearing the back end of his career. This was no longer about building for 5 years down the line. It was about the next 1 or 2. Ramsey and Slay give Pittsburgh an experienced but aging secondary. Ramsey carries a cap hit of $26.6 million in 2025. That's not the kind of deal the old Steelers ever would have made. But this isn't the old Steelers. Stacking salaries and mortgaging the future. In total, Pittsburgh added over $60 million in veteran salaries this offseason alone. Metcalf's massive extension, Rodgers' cap-friendly but incentive-laden contract, Ramsey's high-dollar deal, Slay's guaranteed payout, plus Jonnu Smith's mid-tier salary. These aren't contracts designed for long-term sustainability. They're designed to win now and pay later. It's a dangerous game, and it's a game the Steelers have historically refused to play. The T.J. Watt problem. Meanwhile, a storm is brewing. T.J. Watt, the face of the franchise, is entering the final year of his contract, and he wants to be paid like the best edge rusher in football, because he is. But after the spending spree, Pittsburgh's cap space is limited. There's already buzz about a potential holdout. Some insiders even suggest a trade request isn't off the table. If the Steelers can't lock Watt in before the season starts, the locker room dynamic could fracture. Rodgers is a short-term fix. Watt is a long-term pillar. The franchise can't afford to lose him, but they also might not be able to pay him. Is there a master plan or just mayhem? The question now, was this chaos by design? The Steelers have gone from conservative to aggressive, from builders to buyers, from patient to urgent. They've abandoned the playbook that defined them for decades in favor of a high-stakes win-now strategy. Maybe it ends in a Super Bowl and a legacy-defining redemption for Rodgers, or maybe it ends with cap hell, locker room drama, and the departure of T.J. Watt. Either way, we'll look back on 2025 as the moment the Steelers decided to go all in. The question now isn't whether they've changed, it's whether the gamble will pay off before the window slams shut.